Hello again, dear relatives. Welcome back. I hope that you had a chance to stretch and check in on Silent James as they illustrate the summit. For our closing session, we're joined by our fierce Decolonial Aunties who will talk about systems gaps and victories. Our panel moderator is Jolene Holgate, Training and Education Director of the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women. And our panelists are, and they'll be introduced again by Jolene, are Meskee Yatsayte, the volunteer MMIWR advocate, Honey Sunday, the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women Project and media assistant, and Chief Judge Verna Teller of the Pueblo of Isleta. You have the floor, Jolene.
Yatsayte, good morning, everyone. I want to thank the tribal leaders, our advocates, and our relatives for being here today, and we're happy to share this space with you virtually. I am Dine. I am Navajo from a small community called Shanto, Arizona, near the Four Corners area. My clans are Isleta and Shnet Dolok at Dine Abashish Chin, Hushkan Hatzoha Dashachedo, Twittich Eatni Dashanale. And very happy to bring this panel to you. Before we get into introductions, we, in the spirit of recognizing the amazing women that not only carry the work within our communities, but also recognizing our fierce aunties who are so important to this movement, we felt like it was appropriate to have this panel. The purpose is to recognize the aunties that are doing this work, who are informing us of what the gaps look like in the system. And we know it's not perfect, but we have the opportunity today to illustrate what that looks like on the ground and what that looks like in our tribal communities. How can we inform our tribal leaders and providers on how they can advocate for our most marginalized relatives, but also to celebrate us? You will hear perspectives from these amazing aunties who are working directly with community, who are navigating the system and sharing their experiences and their role in the system itself to support survivors and increase safety in our tribal communities. So with that, I would like to go into our introductions of our wonderful panelists. Meskee Yatsayte.
Okay. Can you see me? Okay. Good morning, everyone. Yatsayte Verna. She'e Meskee Yanabat Yatsayte Yanashe. Nanisht Eja Tachini Nishle. Thunder Clan Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation Bashishchin. Hatswada Shichedo Chichimeka Nakai Dashanala. I am from Oklahoma, but I do live here in New Mexico. I am a member of the Navajo Nation. I am Dine. Also, I am the founder of Navajo Nation Missing Persons Updates and am a founding member of Missing and Murdered Dine Relatives. And I am also on the New Mexico MMIWR Task Force. So it's good to be here. Thank you, everybody, for letting me be able to attend.
Meskee. Honey?
Good morning. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Good morning, relatives. My name is Honey Sunday. I identify as a Dine transgender woman. However, I do not like to expose myself as transgender due to past events that I faced while growing up. I'm from Pueblo, New Mexico, and I've been living in Albuquerque for over 20 years. I'm the project and media assistant for Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women, and I'm progressively learning and working to be an advocate or a direct service provider for the Native transgender community.
Thank you so much for that, honey. And Honorable Judge Verna Teller. Judge Teller, if you'd like to provide a 1 to 2 minute introduction.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm still signing documents here as we're speaking. We're in a very busy court here at Isleta, so it just never ends. Thank you so much. Thank you for your indulgence. Good morning. My name is Ayashuni. I'm Southern Tiwa from Shihuipak. My name is Verna Teller in English, I'm from the Pueblo of Isleta. I'm currently serving as the chief judge for the Pueblo of Isleta, and I just got out of a hearing a minute ago, so my apologies for running a little late. I'm anxious to be on this panel and share some thoughts with you about the work that we're doing here at Isleta with our families and our children. And my thoughts about, and I've been around for a little while, so I'd be happy to talk about some of the changes that I've seen in our communities as it relates to some of the current social issues that we're all facing. I'm looking forward to this.
Thank you so much, Judge Teller.
I'm
with that-
still working on adjusting my thing here, my camera. It's kind of crazy. Okay, I think I'm good.
Great. And let us know if there's any other support that you need, Judge. We'll be there to help you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So with that, I think if we could just go in the same order as we did our introductions, Meskee, Honey, and Judge Teller, tell us a little bit about yourself and the passion work that you're engaged in, Meskee.
Right. Well, this all started back in 2013. I believe it was an evening when I kind of looked through Facebook. I was new to Facebook, and I started to notice that there was a lot of our relatives that were using Facebook as a platform to find their missing relatives. So I got curious, and you know how us nosy aunties are. I got curious and I decided to do a little research and see, how many of our people were missing. How, not just our people, but I mean Native Americans in general. And at the time, I didn't come up with anything. There was a couple of articles on I believe there was 2 articles on 2 relatives that were missing. One was back in 1954 out in, I believe, Grand Canyon, Arizona, and one here in Gallup, New Mexico. And when I did do that research, I kind of got a little bit more curious and I started to Google more, and I didn't come up with anything except NamUs, and that is a national missing and unidentified database. So I got into that. I figured out how to make myself an account. I looked through there. At the time, there was 7 Diné people that were in the system. Now, they were manually put in there, and it just said Native American. And then I went through a lot more of the missing individuals, and there was a couple more that were there, but they were miscategorized. And they were marked as Hispanic, Asian, other, white, and unknown. And that was very disturbing to me because, growing up on the Navajo reservation, who's Navajo, you know who your people are. And just seeing that they were miscategorized, it brought a lot of questions to my brain, like what's going on here? I mean, is this how they're seeing us? And so I started to think, okay, well, I went through and I seen some more of our people that were missing, and they were using just regular pictures. The information on there was very undetailed. So I decided to get their pictures and start making flyers. I made a page called Navajo Nation Missing Persons Updates. And from there it kicked off. I was able to bring a little bit more attention to our missing relatives at the time. I did a little bit more research. I started to find a little bit more. And once I got all that established, I made a booklet and I put all these missing flyers in there. And then I brought this up to the Law and Order Committee out in Navajo Nation. That's when I met Miss Amber Crotty, Delegate Amber Crotty. And then I met Jolene. So this was right around the time when things were starting to really get focused on our MMIWR, and we all got together, we collaborated, and just knowing that there was other people out there that was so passionate about making a difference. This is where we got MMDR started, Missing and Murdered Diné Relatives. And we've been collaborating, we've joined forces, and Navajo Nation missing persons updates along with MMDR. And we've been going for it ever since. And, you know, I was working with all the families back then, and we were trying to get a lot of things changed on Navajo Nation when we were meeting with the Vice President, Jonathan Nez at the time. Now, a lot of promises were made. He did help us with some stuff, but a lot of those promises were broken. And just seeing the, you know, the look on these families' faces when, you know, things that were promised to them were broken, it was just really heartbreaking. And so the thing that I wanted was for us to have a missing persons day in Navajo Nation, but that didn't happen. So I was able to join New Mexico Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Relatives Task Force. And that's when I brought that to their attention. And now that has been Senate Bill 13 that's been passed. And I'm very, very proud that the families are finally going to get what they well deserved. And, you know, this is what we need, not just for our Indigenous folks, for all families for the New Mexico area. And so that's just a little bit about, it's just a little bit about how I got started. But since then, I've been doing a lot of advocacy, a lot of prevention work, and a lot of awareness. My family and I would go out in the middle. It didn't even matter. We could be in Ganado, we could be out in Zuni, and we would have our flyers and we'd stand right outside on side of the road, and we would just share that. They were big poster boards, so we would share that, and we would stand there and say, do you know any of us? We are all missing. And, you know, from there, it just kind of kicked off. I did what I could just to bring that attention. And, you know, but I'm very glad that I'm able to collaborate with so many wonderful people, so many sponsors, so many leadership individuals that has taken the voices from the families and now are able to do something and make a difference. So that's just a little bit about myself and how I got started with this.
Thank you so much for that, Meskee. And thank you for naming some of those kind of the introduction to the challenges that we're going to talk about on this panel. And we're hoping today that we can illustrate that, you know, maybe it's a matter of informing our leadership and how they work with grassroots organizations and how they work with families. So I'm pretty excited to get into that. Honey, tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the work that you're engaged in.
Can you repeat the question, Joan?
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about yourself, honey, and why is this work important to you?
Well, like I said, I am transgender, and yeah, I've been transgender like my whole life. And like I guess like some of the challenges that I encountered while growing up, like one of the challenges I faced was being unsheltered. And the majority of the places that was supposed to help with resources or services out in Albuquerque were not pleasant when they found that I was born a male. I got rejected from shelters, so I had to resort to sleeping outside, all the while like trying my best to avoid the law enforcement, which is another challenge I faced, which is experiencing sexual violence against me by law enforcement. I was in a situation where an officer I encountered took advantage of my body when I got stopped for street working. And I really like tribal leaders. I guess like I want tribal leaders to see it from my point of view, because folks think that this type of violence doesn't exist because they can't see it. And I'm sharing these experiences to highlight this issue because we need to be talking about it and need to recognize it. Tribal leaders have the power to make these changes and have the power, to make these changes.
Thank you so much for that, honey. And all of that is valid. And we're really happy to have you on our panel, as well as a representative from our coalition. One thing to note is that our staff on the coalition, along with the work that we're doing, many of us are engaged in community work and we are advocates outside of our roles. So I just want to highlight that and send a shout out to our staff who are always doing amazing work. Judge Teller, tell us a little bit about yourself and the passion work that you're engaged in.
Hey, thank you for asking that. And thank you so much to Honey and Meskee for their words as well, and they're very important for all of us. So I've been in my journey began as a child, in terms of being very involved in learning and being mentored by elders in my community. Um, to be passionate about community affairs and community. And I guess the first thing is just loving your people and loving your community and who you are and where you come from, and just being part of that has always been important to me from childhood. So all my life I was around elders and um, family members. My grandfather was a judge for many years here, way back when they had the Court of Indian Offenses. And I want to preface this by saying that I'm old. I'm way older than probably everybody in the room. So I've been around for a little while. But many of my family members were involved in public work for a long time, in tribal affairs and community affairs forever. And I just happened to be, I guess, a tag along, if you will, when I was a child. My brother, my dad, my grandpa, they took me everywhere with them. And so I became very comfortable and used to being around those decision makers in our community. And I'm talking about governors, tribal council members, who at that time were all men. And so I became very comfortable, and also started learning about what was important to our community and the role that women play now. I talk a lot, sometimes in some of my past discussions, I've talked about trickle down patriarchy. That's one of my terms that I like to use because, and I'm really excited and happy to see that more and more young women are getting involved in the issues that surround our communities and are having a voice in that. And I think the more that we have our voice out there, it's really going to be important. And some of us, myself as one, I'm one that I've been around for a really long time in many capacities of tribal leadership and governance. I was a governor of the Pueblo of Isleta, and I've served on the council many terms. I've been president of the council. At one time when the tribal council was the appellate court, I was the chief appellate justice. I've been appointed to serve as chief judge, and I'm on my 5th term. I'm going to be completing my 5th cycle as a chief judge here at Isleta. And so when in this type of a position, it really puts all the issues that are before us in our community right there in our face. And so we have to address those things. And many of those issues that I deal with involve families and children. And when you talk families and children, we're talking mothers and fathers, young parents. And we're looking now at all these societal issues that are facing our communities. Native communities, we're not islands unto ourselves. And so our people are in and out of here at home, the res, if you will, and they come back and, they deal with a lot. We deal with a lot of challenges. Our people are dealing with a lot of challenges out there. And my work involves what is my role? This is a question I ask myself every day. What can I do today to help our community heal in whatever way that healing needs to occur? Whether it's working with our families, whether it's working with our young men, our young women, our elders, our children, what is it I can do in my capacity to help our community heal? And I think that's really a critical position to have. I think it's an important thought to always have. The minute you wake up in the morning, you thank Creator for having given you a new day, and then you ask Creator, what can I do to help my community heal today? And so that's been my mantra for as long as I can remember. And so the work that I've done in my community and in other Native communities throughout my many different careers, if you will, lifetimes of doing work in Native America, is that, you know, my goal is always to look at what kinds of solutions that we can come and bring to the table. How can we create dialogue amongst our own people, among ourselves, so that we begin to start looking at how can we heal ourselves in many different diverse ways. Now, nobody's going to heal us from the outside. We have to do it internally. We have to do it amongst ourselves and our people, just like our family. We're all family. And so from that perspective, it's really important that some of us who have been around for a long time have seen the changes, and we've seen how our communities have changed, how we look at our custom and tradition of our people, how we look at our, our beliefs, how do we integrate that into today's way of living, you know, and we make that in our families the number one, they are very important. So I'm very passionate about the kind of work. I've always been passionate about the kind of work I do. The Pueblo of Isleta is my sovereign. This is my sovereign. And I'm gonna, my firm belief and my position has always been that I'm gonna be fighting for my community and whatever we need to make our community healthy, and that our community's rights are being met and addressed. And I'm gonna do that from the inside, because this is my sovereign. And so I'm grateful for those Native people who are on the outside working on that, you know, on our behalf outside. But somebody's got to be on the inside all the time fighting for us on the inside. And that's where I see my own role. And I think I see many of you have that same, you know, position, is working in your community inside and understanding your community and understanding what the needs of our community is. If we don't heal, we're survivors. Our people have been surviving and healing forever. And how we do that is from the inside. And so that's my job. I see that as my work. And, you know, I'm also at that point where I really want to, and I've been offering this for a long time, is to work with our young people, to work with, you know, everybody probably is younger than I am on this in here right now anyway, but, you know, what can I do in terms of my experience and what I've seen and what I've learned throughout my own life in terms of leadership, to pass that baton on to our younger people, so that, because we need good leaders in our tribes, we need good leaders, we need leaders who recognize our needs and are willing to help from the inside. We can't, you know, we have to understand what's going on the outside that impacts our communities, but it's important for us to pay attention to the needs of our people from internally. I just heard, I think it was Meskee saying that she went to her leader and they listened, but there was nothing that was really substantive that they were able to help with. So it comes from grassroots. That's where I started. I started grassroots, and I really firmly believe in grassroots. It's really the people. Our governments belong to the people. Tribal leaders are not kings and queens. Tribal leaders are servants of the people. And so that's been my position forever. And I've been in every high level leadership position in my tribe. And my position has always been that I am a servant of the people. And I think that that's what, for myself, I see that in terms of passing the baton to our younger people in terms of leadership and governance, that they have to know that they are servants of the people and they can't be above everyone. It's important. Native people were always humble. And I think humility is really an important characteristic for us to always maintain. My mother, who I miss dearly and who was my mentor and teacher, and who was a high clan mother here in Isleta, and who was very humble. And I grew up with those humble clan mothers that are no longer here, that were my teachers. And those are the ones that I have to honor. And those are the ones that I ask guidance from every day, my ancestors. And if we can keep that in mind, I think that we're going to continue to work toward healing our communities. And I know all of you have something very important to contribute And I look forward to that from all of you. So that's my passion.
Thank you so much, Judge Teller, for sharing so much of your wonderful knowledge and perspective. And I just really want to highlight that I think being a decolonial auntie is not only navigating systems and working past experiences that we've had, but we do have to have that relationship with the system, and how are we making those changes within it in your role. So thank you so much for highlighting that. So we'll go on to our next question here. Meskee, as a decolonial auntie, what challenges have you encountered with the systems in place? A few examples is fine.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think we all know that one of the number one thing is jurisdiction. And running into this problem with families and law enforcement, and the communication gap between both families and law enforcement is, ooh, it's pretty bad. And the jurisdiction gaps between, and I'm going to use Navajo Nation for an example, and we have our Navajo Nation Police Department, and then we have our Navajo Nation Criminal Investigations. Now, we've seen this from our previous what is he, the police chief, Francisco, and he has mentioned this many times in several statements, that trying to communicate with criminal investigations with PD, it was just always a big mess, and that should have been fixed a long time ago. That should be something that shouldn't interfere with any investigation, but it does. And because of that, the families are the ones that are left on that back burner to have to endure the trauma. They're the ones who have to sit there and wait for answers, because these two departments do not work together, because they're too busy fighting over who's got the jurisdiction over this case and that case. And it's, we as advocates, we as family members, we don't understand the jurisdiction part and why it's such a big issue, but it is. And this is always something I always say, we should not have jurisdiction in our hearts, but in the real world, in our law enforcement world, we do. And that plays a big role in a lot of the conflict with our missing persons, and also our murdered relatives cases. And it's really heartbreaking to see this, having to deal with where this person was last reported missing, or where this criminal case had been done at. If this was done on reservation land and the person was from the city, and what goes on after that? What if this person was last seen on reservation land, reported missing on reservation land, but also the person's vehicle was found, with foul play involved in a different state, but also the supposed perpetrator is also being detained because they had murdered several people in another state. What's going to happen next? The family's going to have to go through so much red tape to find out any answers or any resolution. Where's the resources? And I have one case in mind when I'm talking about this, and I'm not going to say a name or anything like that, give out any information, but this type of jurisdiction really is very angering, because the families are the ones that have to deal with this. They're the ones that have to try to find out all the obstacles to get through, and that could take years. So jurisdiction is our number one, it's our number one conflict when it comes to our MMIWR cases.
Thank you for that, Meskee. You're more than welcome to share another example if you'd like.
Okay, well, yeah, we also have one case where this was taking place in Arizona, and the remains were found in New Mexico. Now, it had taken over almost a year and a half to find out if, you know, if this is the person, you know, this is, you know, the family was not aware of this. Again, they had to find out on social media. Now, this person was reported missing in the Gallup area. This took place in Arizona. Now, again, jurisdiction issues, but now there's lack of communication with that department with the families. So again, when it comes to jurisdiction and families and the Navajo Police Department communicating, that again is another communication gap. And like I said, you know, we shouldn't have jurisdiction in our hearts, but we do. So this is so many things that connect right back to it is jurisdiction this, jurisdiction that. And, you know, we have so many cases that are, you know, been reported on the reservation, but is happening in urban areas. So what happens now? You know, that case, and a lot of the times the case just sits there because, you know, nobody wants to take that time to say, okay, that's our jurisdiction, we'll take over from here. But, you know, instead they're trying to point fingers at each other. And it happens a lot of times with our tribal police department when it comes to like our Gallup police department. They're over there pointing fingers at each other because we do have a missing persons case that was reported missing in the Gallup area, but also reported with the Crown Point district. Now, when I had called for an update on that, they had no information on this. And you know, the operator had told me, the Metro Dispatch had told me that they didn't have jurisdiction over this case. So I went to county. County told me that was Crown Point's jurisdiction. So now because of that, they had no idea that was their jurisdiction. They had to go back into their file and find the information on this individual. So this person was not even in the computer system. His missing persons report was still in filing. So this whole time, after all these years, his case was not being looked at all. So that, again, what happened there? Was it jurisdiction issues? And because of that, this person's case was not even looked at. And this was over 10 years. And it's really disappointing to see things like this and hear things, and the family's just not updated on this. So this whole time the family thought that this case was entered into the system, and it wasn't. A very sad situation. So, I mean, I really do hope that things get better with all the attention that we're getting now, and jurisdiction, you know, that gap needs to be filled. Even if we have to, you know, try to request for a task force for all, you know, tribal, the BIA, we can have like the city, county, state, federal, all together. And if there's one case that has different jurisdictions, then let's get together and work together. Let's get something done for this family, because this person is still missing. And if we're over here pointing fingers at each other, it's just going to go in circles and nothing's ever going to be done. So let's try and work on this jurisdiction gap. You know, that's what I'm hoping that we can do, is bring that jurisdiction gap to the attention of our law enforcement, because we can't do nothing, but we can bring it to your attention. It's up to our leaders to make that change. And I really hope that one day that, you know, that won't be an issue anymore. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Meskee. And I can hear the passion in your voice, and it's so inspiring. I think those are definitely important issues that brings up a couple of questions, maybe that, you know, as advocates or leaders who are in this space, about like, how do we untangle that jurisdiction issue? How do our advocates and leaders affect that change? You brought up a really great recommendation. Is this a task force? Do we need to come together as like a working group to start really taking a look at what this looks like in the state of New Mexico? What are those cross-commission agreements? What are those MOUs that are in place that are supporting families? I think, you know, as a fellow task force member with you with MMDR, I think some of the things that we've seen is how families are kind of given the runaround, calling different numbers that they're given in just needing, law enforcement to respond or to file a missing persons case. So yeah, I think that's a really great recommendation. Thank you for that, Meskee.
Yes, definitely. I think it would be really nice to have just one phone number to call, because just for an example, we had a person that was potentially missing. So I was working on a flyer for this person in the Albuquerque area. And when I called the Albuquerque Police Department, you know how many numbers I had to call to finally get to a missing persons department? I had to call 6 and then waited 36 minutes on one line. So, eventually somebody's going to give up if they have information on something, and this also goes for our Metro Dispatch. If, they're not able to get the right information through, I believe we should just have one phone number that our people are able to call. It would make things a lot more easier. So they're able to talk to somebody and not an automated service.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. Thank you, Meskee.
Mm-hmm.
And honey, as a decolonial auntie, what are some examples of challenges that you have experienced?
Thanks, Jolene. I believe tribal leaders need to know that there are many types of violence against the Native transgender community, and it does exist out here. And it'd be cool if the tribal leaders step up and change it for the transgender community. I guess I have 2 examples. While growing up, I never had anyone like to step up, and it'd be cool like if the tribal leaders had our backs like that. But one example was like when I was out here in Albuquerque, I was homeless, and I think tribal leaders need to advocate on behalf of the transgender women and relatives to stop the discriminatory practices that shelters are using. This means like advocating for safe and supportive environment for us, providing increased resource opportunities, and asking the shelters to change their policies that are inclusive of all relatives and respect of gender identities. And the law enforcement, additionally, like tribal leaders need to hold law enforcement accountable. We need to recognize that also engage in the discriminatory practices and target our transgender relatives. And this needs to stop. We need tribal leaders to advocate for us, especially when resources are being allocated to police, that those resources and their responsibility is to protect and serve all relatives. They need to know that we deserve respect, and that means honoring our gender identity and our right to live freely and safely.
Thank you so much for that, honey. I think a part of this discussion is also to really highlight how are we advocating and showing up for our relatives who are transgender, non-binary, or two-spirit. I think a lot of times our relatives get left out of that conversation when we are talking about these services. So I think, honey, you brought up some really important, valid points in terms of how social services, shelter services, really need to start eliminating some of the discriminatory practices that they have and ensure that all of our relatives have access to those resources, and also accountability of law enforcement who are also responsible for protecting communities and not causing harm. Thank you so much for those really clear examples, honey.
Thank you.
So this next question is for you, Meskee. How can tribal leaders work with grassroots groups who are addressing the missing and murdered crisis in their communities? And how can they support fierce aunties like you and relatives who are working on the ground?
Well, I would say, first of all, I think asking the families to participate in any groups that they are going to form, because right now I know that Navajo Nation president and vice president do have an internal group, and if I remember correctly, I think I wrote it down. They had printed this press release, and it says a tribal community response plan. So this is just an example. They do have a internal MMIWR task force. Now it says their 4 components are law enforcement, media strategies, victim support services, and community-based resources. What I don't see on here is families. And families should always be number 1, because they are the ones who hold the key to everything. They are the ones who are our experts. And I do speak from experience because I am one of those MMIWR families. And when our tribal leaders leave out our families, it's very heartbreaking, because that's where you're going to get your answers. That's where you're going to get, you know, all your recommendations, because they're going to let you know what is lacking and what they're experiencing and what they're having difficulties with, their obstacles. And including the family should always be number 1. And with MMDR, we do that. We have tried to work with our tribal leaders, and at the beginning it was there, the communication was there, but now it's kind of like we're on our own again. So grassroots organizations, and along with the families, because without the families, we don't have grassroots organizations. So I believe that all tribal leaders should always listen to the families. But when they tell their stories, keep that very sacred to your heart, because they are opening their hearts up to you, asking you for help, asking you for a change. They need that. They need that, but they also don't need to be told broken promises. So if you are going to talk to a family member or family members, and you want to be, let's say, the hero, and say, I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to do that. I promise you this, we're going to get this done. But then you don't do it. How does that make you look? It makes you look really bad. And then that trust that these families had in you, it closes back up. And not just for the families, but all, you know, all community members, because we're looking at you. You are our leaders. You're our voice. But if you go and you make promises that you know that you're not able to keep, that just brings more trauma to the families. And now that they opened up, now they're going to close back up, and they're not going to trust. That is a big key, is trust. And we need that trust. We need that accountability from our tribal leaders. So bringing our family members into this should always be number 1. So that would be my number 1 recommendation, is listen to our families, because that's where you're going to get your information. That's where you're going to build, because that's the way our grassroots organizations work. We listen to the families, we listen to the survivors, we listen to our victims. And without their stories, we don't have nothing, because we're learning from them. And if we are survivors ourselves, then we also bring that to our table. So I'm asking all our tribal leaders, open your hearts and listen to families. But please do not take advantage of our stories, of our tears, because we are counting on you to make a difference. And if you can't make that difference, please don't make a promise you can't keep, because it hurts more when you break that promise to families. You're causing more trauma than it needs to have within our nations.
Thank you for that very strong, direct, powerful response, Meskee. And I think it's important that we name that. I don't know, I don't even have a comment, because that was just perfect. Thank you so much for that, Meskee. Judge Teller, what are some of the challenges that you've also faced in your role, not only as a judge, but even your experience as leadership? What are some of those challenges that you've faced?
One of the challenges that I think that's really prevalent throughout Indian country, especially in our part of the world here, is that we don't have enough women in leadership positions. You all know women have a different way of thinking. Women are, innately, we're nurturers, we're the ones that bear children. So we have a whole different perspective about life and about the needs of our community. It's different from our brothers and the men in our leadership positions. So the balance isn't there, and we haven't been balanced for a really long time. And so it's really critical for young women to start thinking about what they can do to become part of the leadership so that we create more balance in the way our leaders make decisions on behalf of our people. Now, it's many of us, we have different variables that we deal with. I mean, we're looking at how big is our tribe. I mean, when you compare the Pueblo of Isleta, for example, and you compare the Navajo Nation, or any of the Pueblos, for example, or many tribes compared to the Navajo Nation, we're all small. And so it's easier in some ways for us to deal with some of these critical issues because we're smaller. And I've having worked right now, one of the things that occurred here a few years back that Isleta was a huge part of was the notification process that came to the state legislature. Isleta back in 2005 through the tribal court initiated a communication with the local governments outside the res where all our kids go to school. And so whenever any of our children got into trouble out there, whether they were, I don't know, had to squabble with another kid or whatever the case might be that brought them to the attention of the juvenile justice system, we were in communication, meaning the Isleta tribal court, and our probation people were in communication immediately with Valencia County law and their jurisdiction in terms of establishing a relationship so that we could communicate whenever any of our children got into any issues in that jurisdiction. They would immediately notify Isleta, and they would notify our tribal court and our probation people and say, look, we have a child, we have a minor who's gotten into a little trouble here in Valencia County. Now he's at the attention of the juvenile justice system in Valencia County, but we're letting Isleta know in case Isleta has any resources. They're not going to give us jurisdiction, but they're going to give us an opportunity to take over for the purpose of providing resources, whether it's traditional resources or regular kinds of resources, counseling or whatever, even monitoring if they get put on probation, that we would do it at the tribal level. We've been doing that for many years, and somewhere along the line it came to the attention of the state. And ultimately what happened was the state of New Mexico back in 2019, I believe it was, or 2018, passed a law, that's the notification bill. Now we've been working on that closely with the state, and I think they tasked CYFD to take charge of that process, and the process being that we would look at protocols, develop protocols so that the state of New Mexico, any jurisdiction in the state of New Mexico is required by law right now to notify the tribe when there's a child that's come to their justice system. Now, we've been able to work it out for most of the tribes in terms of the questions that came up. Who's notified? Do they notify the governor of the Pueblo? Do they notify probation? Do they notify the court? Who do they notify when you have a child? It's similar to the way ICWA works, the Indian Child Welfare Act, where you have to notify the tribe if there's a child out there in that jurisdiction. Now, the tribe that we have had the most problems with in trying to help develop a protocol for notification is Navajo Nation. And the reason for that is because they're huge. And then you have all these chapters and half of them I don't know how much they communicate and I just heard from Meskee that there's a real gap in communication with a number of tribal agencies to respond to some of these issues that are impacting our people. Now, somewhere along I'm not real sure. I mean, I worked a little bit for a little while in To'Hajiilee, so I was became a little bit familiar with how Navajo Nation's governmental structure is. And I can understand the difficulties that many of you have in terms of getting the response that you would like, the leadership to address because it's so huge. We can't even work our way through notification for these issues regarding minors. So I can't even imagine, how what you're dealing with in terms of getting a response from your leadership when you expand, the in terms of how many chapters, for example, that you deal with, maybe at the chapter level. For me, I've always found that you start at the bottom and kind of work your way up, because it doesn't work the other way around. And then one of the things that I think is really critical is to educate the leadership, because you can ask them for anything and everything, but if they don't understand it, and if they don't really understand the real dynamics of what that issue is and how it's impacting the people and the members of the tribe, then they're just going to, put it on the back burner next, and when you look at the priorities of our leadership, are they the health of the community? And I'm talking about social, mental, and spiritual health. No, well, you might as well put spiritual on the back burner, because most tribal leaders don't think that's even an issue or part of their, what they should be doing is to promote spiritual health in our community. And that just means being good to each other, really, and caring about each other. And when you care about each other, and when you care for your people and you're in a leadership position, then you're going to listen to the people at the very bottom and all the way. So it's going to be critical to provide that level of education to your leadership before they're going to really pay attention. That's my experience. The other thing, and I know this may not be a popular, I know it's not popular with the leaders, and personally I don't care, because they need to hear it. And that's the people need to know who they're electing in their leader. Just because they're your uncle, your auntie, your cousin, you're going to vote for them. They might not have any clue what the issues are, or they don't have any clue how government runs, or what their responsibility is as a leader. But just because they're your relative, your neighbor, your friend, your buddy, whatever, you're going to vote for them. That's why we need leadership of quality. And that quality leadership and it's not just one tribe or two, it's sort of rampant right now. And you can talk to a tribal member from any tribe and they're going to tell you the same story. Our tribal leaders are not representing the needs of the people. And I've seen that, and I've heard it for many, many years. And I think it's going to be up to the people, the grassroots people, to be really careful and really think about who they're voting for and who they're putting in these leadership positions. That's going to be critical. If you want tribal leaders to listen to you, you have to have tribal leaders that really care about the people and understand governance. Because if they're just in there for a name or a status or whatever they're in there for, they're disconnected from the people, and we're not going to get the response that we need in our communities from our leadership. And I think it's rampant. Leaders don't like to hear that. I just happen to be too old already, and I don't really care anymore what people hear me say, because it's the truth. We need, and that's why I'm really advocating and really pressing on our young people to start thinking about their role in leadership and preparing themselves. If we really, really care about the health of our community in every aspect, then we need to be prepared to be in those leadership positions to respond to the needs of our people. So that's, not only is that part of my passion, but that's my story, and I'm sticking to it because I think it's important for us to think about these things when we start electing our leadership. Now, for Navajo Nation, because I've been listening to what Meskee and Honey said about kind of the lack of response, or at least just to a point, and it kind of fizzles out. That's not unique to Navajo Nation. I see it, with a lot of tribes, including my own. So what that old saying is, a squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? And so it's always critical to be that squeaky wheel. They might get tired of you. They might want to run the other way when they see you coming, because they know that you're going to be on them about them doing their job. But you know what? That needs to happen all the time. We need to keep reminding our leaders what our needs are. And how are you going to respond to our needs? That's the question that needs to be asked to them. And, I really like that idea of a task force, because it seems like if there's some body, especially if it's a grassroots one, that has leadership within that task force to be the voice and the ears for that group and for that cause. You know, I think a lot of times it works because you have to be in front of the leadership in order to make them pay attention to what your needs are. Now here in Isleta, you know, we work with, one of the things that I'm very passionate about is working with families and children. What I'm finding in my community is that it's heartbreaking for me as a judge to sit in a courtroom where I have families, where I have children that I have to remove from their parents and place them somewhere because mom and dad are having issues. And a lot of those issues are related to substance abuse and alcohol. Right now, we're seeing a rise in meth use, heroin use, and this is not just here. This is rampant going on right now, and it's dividing our families. And the victims of that are our children. Our babies are the victims of that. So what's lacking? The resources to help these parents learn how to be parents. A lot of our parents are really young and they don't have the skills to, or maybe it's generational. Maybe they never learned from their own families, from their own elders, how to create structure and discipline so that your children have some structure. Because if you don't start when they're babies, you're not going to do it when they're 14, 15, 16 years old. It's going to be much harder to get children to be on a path that's healthy. And that's what I see right now is that we need to help our parents. What are the resources that we're lacking? We're lacking resources to help parents learn parenting skills, whether those are traditional, whether they're mainstream type. Traditional is very important. Parenting. How were we parented? How did our grandparents and our elders establish rules for us? And a lot of that is respect. There's a lot of respect lacking in our communities. So our own children are turning on us, turning on parents and saying, I don't have to do that. Parents need to realize how important they are as role models for their children, because children model the behavior of the adults. And if we as adults are not modeling for our children how to be good individuals, self-sufficient, respectful, all those things that we claim are our indigenous way of life and our indigenous way of thinking, having respect, loving each other, helping each other, sense of community, all those things that we're always touting that who we are as Native people, we need to start actually practicing it so that we're modeling that for our children. And you know, it's really unfortunate that a lot of our families, especially families for tribes that live way out there where there's no job opportunities and the kind of economic support that they need to support and raise their children in a healthy way, they end up going to the cities to work, whether it's Gallup, Albuquerque, Farmington, wherever. Once you go out there, there's a disconnect. Parents are going to work and kids are at home by themselves. And believe me, I see a lot of this in Albuquerque. I've seen it working for many years alongside some of family parent and grandparent adults of children that attend NACA. I've been very closely associated for NACA for a very long time. I really understand and respect that philosophy of NACA to bring back our children back to our own way of and cultural and really promoting our culture in terms of who we are as a Native people. I really respect and I understand that and I promote it. But what I see, and it's not anybody's fault, is that a lot of the children are left at home to be their own parent because maybe mom and dad have to work and there's nobody there to really watch them. Some of them are living hand to mouth. A lot of those children didn't have anything to eat except what they got at school. So where is that community that we talk about all the time where we're helping each other? You know, those are really the kinds of things that I see lacking. And, you know, we can point fingers all over the place, but really we need to look at ourselves and look at, you know, ourselves as not only tribal members, individuals, as Native people, as communities, as families, as tribes. We need to look at what are we doing to promote health in our communities. And that's social health, physical health, spiritual health. Those are really three important things that I see. I see resources lacking in terms of counseling, resources available to help our families get back on the right track, whether it's rehabilitation resources that they need to address substance abuse. How many rehabs are there out there for our Native people? Hardly any, and it takes an arm and a leg for somebody to get into one of those. You know what? So we all know the problems. We can all sit down and make a list of all the problems that we have in our communities and within our governments or within our tribes. Everybody knows what the problems are. The real question is, what are the solutions? That's really what we should be talking about and creating solutions for this. And they don't have to be huge. They can be very small, because taking those baby steps to address the problems that we have and the challenges that we have in our community is the way it's going to finally begin to wear away at those problems and those challenges. And there's that, creating solutions, creating action plans, because we talk a lot. We talk a lot about the issues and we want to do this, that should happen, and they should be doing this, but we don't have any real action plan so that we make it work. And that some of that means being a real pest in somebody's ear so that that gets done. I see that. We all need to be that pest in somebody's ear, especially our leadership, so they understand what the needs of the communities are, and that people are out there at the grassroots, and people like all of you that I see a lot of names here that I recognize that in some way or the other have had some contact with. And I just feel like everybody has a real interest and a love and a concern for their community and their people. We're just kind of all moving in different directions, and we really need to communicate more and support each other in these efforts. I really, we just recently had a little get together with a group of young people, and I'm talking about between the age of 10 and 17 children, young people. We had a little exercise here. As a matter of fact, I don't know if somebody's on here that was part of that, facilitating that. But one of the things that we need to ask our young children is, how do you view your community? What are the challenges that you see in your community? Let's write them down. What are the things about your community that make you feel good and make you feel proud? Let's write those things down. From all of those things that you see as challenges and all of the things that you see that make you proud of who you are and part of that community, what can you do? What little task, what action can you take to make it better or to address that challenge that you identify? We need to engage our young people. And I'm sure a lot of you that are here now are young mothers and you're young parents. So this is where we start, is with our children. So that as we move on and they get older and older, they have that sense of belonging, which is really critical for our children to have that sense of belonging. We need to communicate to our children that they're important, they're an important part of our community, and that we love them. Our children aren't hearing it enough. And I'm not talking about you individually and your children. They probably are, but there's a lot of them out there that aren't hearing it. So it's our responsibility, as the term that everybody's using now, aunties. It's our responsibility as their aunties to let them know how important they are to our community and to our people and to our tribe and to our future. Those are the gaps, and they might not always be on the outside. The gaps might be internally, and those are the gaps that we need to identify so that we can start stepping up and filling in those gaps with love and with commitment to work for our communities to make us healthier. That's just the way I see it. And I see a lack of resources. I mean, we know that there's a lack of resources out there. There's a lack of counseling. There's a lack of behavioral health resources, mental health resources, financial resources, all of those things, housing resources. I mean, they're just, you could just make a whole list of the kinds of resources that are lacking in our communities. And that's what our tribal leadership needs to be focused on. And we need to keep reminding our leaders what their job is. I better stop because I think my time is going to be up. So, but anyway, that's just a piece of, I could go on, and I think Tiffany knows I could probably go on and on about how passionate I feel about what our community's needs are and what we can do to make it better for our children. Because this is not a cliche that our children are our future. And whatever our ancestors did for us to have what we have today, and to be who, and to recognize and respect and honor who we are today, we have to give that credit to our ancestors. And one of these days, we're all going to be ancestors for our children and for those that are not yet born. And we need to make sure that we're going to step up to the plate and know that they'll honor us for what we left for them. And that's what I have to say for now.
Thank you so much, Judge Teller. That was amazing and that was beautiful. And it reminds me of even like the aunties I have in my own family. Aunties can be very direct or very loving. And I love that the powerful statements that our fierce aunties on this panel are conveying is passion. Something that came to mind when I was young, because when you hear these things, right, when we call for accountability, not only within our systems, but only even within our families and then within our individual level. I heard a sister once say to me, the day your parents or the day anyone stops saying anything to you about advice or helping you out is the day that you're not loved. So these things are being said for a reason. So just take that with your heart as you have this information and all of these amazing words said to you. And it's said with love, and it's said with, love. So with that, I think we'll get to our last question for the sake of time here. Honey, tell us about a victory that you've had in your work. And what does that mean to you, honey?
I think I guess it's like where I'm at right now. Like all my life, I've been fighting to be myself and to be hired by Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women. It makes me feel like I'm here, you know what I mean? Like I'm somebody and I feel accepted. I'm in a space where I can be who I want to be. And yeah, I guess that would be like one of the victories that I have.
Thank you for sharing that with us, honey. And I just want to say that you are going into an amazing advocate, and so happy to have you on the panel today. And I just love that your messages are always clear, just to the point. And thank you for sharing that, honey. And we love you. And thank you so much for being with us today. Meskee, tell us about a victory in your work and what does it mean to you?
I'm going to say, I think the proudest victory that I've done is the recommendation for Senate Bill 13, because it has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with families that need help and for their missing loved ones. And that day is dedicated just for them so that they can get the help and resources that they've deserved for a very long time. And I just want to thank everybody that was involved for that, because that was a victory for everyone and for the families, most importantly.
Yes, thank you so much for your strong advocacy and getting that passed for community. Judge Teller, what's a victory in your work that you'd like to share with us, and what does it mean to you?
So for a long time, Isleta Tribal Court was kind of moving toward more of a Western model of court system. And I know Navajo Nation has had a really strong Western model for a long time before the Pueblos did. Sometimes that doesn't work for us because it's so far removed from our own custom and tradition traditional way of dispute resolution and conflict resolution, mediation. So actually, when I was appointed to serve as chief judge, the actual reason behind that was to bring Isleta Tribal Court back into an Isleta Tribal Court and not a model of Metro Court in Albuquerque, where people are going through the system and they're just a number. And sometimes, with all due respect to tribal attorneys out there, you know, we're all brainwashed by the American education system, whether we want to hear it or admit it or not. And so we really have to come back, and we really want to address our needs and maintain who we are as a people. We really have to remind ourselves all the time who we are and what our customs and our traditions are as a people. Because we had governance way long before the Europeans ever set foot here. And we have to go back to that. What obviously it worked for us. So the American model of Western jurisprudence doesn't always work for tribes. And so my role is to move away from that as much as possible. So one of the things that we've done at Tribal Court here in Isleta, and I know Navajo also has this, is the peacemakers. Those are traditional, that's a traditional way of conflict resolution, was our peacemakers. And most of the time they were either some some relative, maybe an uncle, grandfather, grandmother, someone that had that level of respect and that status in the matriarch or the patriarch of our family. And now for Navajo and for many tribes, it was a matriarch that had that high level of authority to settle disputes. And so we have peacemakers at Isleta Court. And what we're also using our peacemakers for now is that we're using them for intervention and prevention efforts with our children. So we're bringing our children in, and our peacemakers are working with our young kids, our minors, in terms of talking to them about our history. They're teaching language, and they're giving them advice and talking to them about how important it is for them to be good citizens, to be good members of the tribe. And so those are the two. Then we also have a healing to wellness court. I, as a chief judge here, I conduct many of my hearings in Tiwa, which is our native language, because I want our people that are coming into court to know exactly what's happening to them, because the judge has a lot of control and has a lot of impact on the lives of the people that come before us. And they have to understand what it all means. And so I conduct court a lot in Tiwa, and I think for me that's really something that I'm hoping that some of the other tribes will start doing in their own tribal courts, so that our people understand. I know sometimes tribal courts have translators, and that might be one of the what might be something Navajo Nation uses, our translators, so that people who only speak Diné can understand when they go to court what's happening about them. So that's one of the things that I think that has been beneficial for Isleta Court in terms of how we deal with our families. One thing I want to say real quick before I end here is that when we talk about violence against Native women, I see violence against Native men as well. So it's not just women that get violated. Unfortunately, one of the things that I see is Native against Native. I don't see, in terms of our percentages here, I very rarely see a non-Native on a Native committing violence. It's Native on Native. And my question is, why are we doing this to each other? So I think it's critical. Again, I talked about young mothers and young parents. We have to teach our children that violence is not acceptable in any form. Violence against each other is not acceptable. And there are ways to settle things without raising a hand on another person. And we need to teach that to our young people, our babies, so they grow up knowing that violence is not an acceptable behavior. If we teach them that from the get-go, from when they're babies, when they grow up to be teenagers, when they grow up to be boyfriends and girlfriends and husbands and wives, they're not beating on each other. That's how we're going to have to start working on stopping violence against each other. So for me, that's my final comment about that. Thank you
Thank you.
so much for having me here.
Yes, thank you so much, Judge Teller. And I want to thank the aunties on this panel for showing up and being very truthful and honest and standing in your truth and letting us know what those challenges are and what those victories can look like and what ways our tribal leadership as well as our advocates can incorporate our culture, our language into the way of working towards safer communities. I would encourage our tribal leaders to reach out to our coalition if you need technical assistance. We have all of this great information to help ways that are thinking outside of the box in terms of systems that we would be happy to share with you. And I just want to thank the participants who stayed with us to the last day, the last panel of the day, for being here. Thank you.
Before our panelists leave, I wanted to make sure that we cover a question that came in through the chat. I asked everyone for their patience. We are running a bit over, but I think this is a particularly important question, given that today is Transgender Visibility Day, and this is an issue that stretches across all of our communities. But the question comes from Angel Charlie, and she states, I'm holding an awareness about how so many of our youth are rejecting the gender binary. They're trans or gender fluid. How might our tribal leaders begin creating a safe space and protections for our youth and Two-Spirit people who would like to take part in ceremonies, but are made to feel like there isn't a place for them when so many of our roles are gendered? This is critical to keeping our cultures, ceremonies, and customs going. And I believe this question in particular might be a good fit for Auntie Verna. But I think Honey and Meskee can also weigh in just briefly, if you can, on what some of those things could be.
Well, I mean, I think it's, it's really a matter of acceptance for all people in whatever ways they have, or whatever they view them, whatever they feel that they are in terms of gender. Everyone is a child of Creator, and everybody deserves respect. And unfortunately, our leadership sometimes doesn't recognize and understand that. I can only speak for Isleta. I can't speak for other tribes in terms of how they treat or recognize those issues around transgender or bisexual or those things that relate to gender. I have yet to see in my community anyone rejected or put aside because of a gender issue in terms of participating in tribal religious ceremonies or dancing or anything like that. I have not seen that come before our traditional leadership or our secular leadership. So it's kind of a difficult question for me to respond to on that level. Other tribes may have more of that incidents coming before them, and maybe there's rejection, which there should never be rejection of your own people, period. I don't care what the case might be. They could be, it doesn't matter what it is. Just to reject another person is just, it's not Indian, it's un-indigenous for us to reject each other. That's how I feel about that. But I'm just going to leave that briefly because I can only speak for Isleta. Education, education, education for our leaders.
Honey, did you have a response?
I do. I think tribal leaders, we need to reconnect to respecting trans relatives. Because I remember there was a day, back in the day when transgender folks were revered as holy people, and yeah, I guess tribal leaders just need to reconnect with the transgender relatives and respect gender identities and the trans relatives that are out here. Yeah.
Thank you, Honey. Meskee, did you have any thoughts on this?
I think we are well on our way for that acceptance, because I do see things being changed, especially with our LGBTQ two-spirited marriages that are being looked at on the Navajo Nation and could be accepted. I believe it has been accepted. I didn't read the article, but I was about ready to. And if we're able to do that, I know we have strong voices with our LGBTQ two-spirited relatives. So that is something that, I'm very glad is brought up, and it's been highlighted, and our relatives with those voices and with us that support them, we're right there behind you to make that change. And I'm pretty sure it's going to happen. If it hasn't happened now, it will happen soon, and I support it with all my
Excellent.
heart.
Excellent. Well, thank you again to all of our panelists, our Decolonial Aunties, for such a powerful, truthful, hard-hitting, informative session. One of the things I want to highlight from your session is how much each of you emphasized different aspects of the importance of bringing back and restoring a culture of care in our communities and in our work, and how important healthy communities are to really fully address this epidemic of violence in our homelands, but to also create the foundation that we need to decolonize and indigenize and evolve our relationships to one another so that we can be better relatives. And so I thank you for your hearts, for your commitment and your work and the passion that you shared with all of us today. We have 3 tribal leaders who have been with us for the entire summit. And I want to give a special shout out to Governor Chavaria of the Pueblo of Santa Clara and Governor Moquino of Pueblo of San Ildefonso and Honorable Council Delegate Amber Crotty. And I also want to thank Governor Paseno of Pueblo of Sandia and Governor Sanchez of Santa Ana for joining us today. Thank you to all of our leaders and our advocates for taking time out of your busy schedules and your busy lives to be with us and to share space with us and to hear from all of our excellent presenters. Please take care of yourself. I know that some of the stories that have been shared can trigger some of us based on our own experiences, but also the work that we're returning to is heavy work. And so being that medicine for our people also requires you to be medicine for yourself and to do that loving and caring work that you need to keep your spirits and your bodies and your minds strong. Thank you again to everyone. We're going to check in with Silent James one more time. Silent James has been capturing so much of the wisdom and the beauty of all of our presenters. That looks great. We'll be sharing these out on the social media and website as soon as they're available. And with that, this concludes the 8th Annual Tribal Leaders Summit. What a special time it has been to share space together. And thank you to the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women and all of your hardworking staff, as well as our tech support for making this event a success. May you all be safe on your journeys.